Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brian Griffith, and here's what's going down this week in your backyard and across the world. A rash of attacks has hit a local mosque as well as a Middle Eastern grocery store in the city of Austin, and authorities believe it is likely the same person. Starting in mid-August and continuing through September, this attacker has smashed windows, slashed tires, and urinated on one of the vans belonging to the North Austin Community Center. Is this a hate crime, and if so, how has this affected the Muslim community of Austin? Joining us to talk about this and more is Imam Islam of the North Austin Community Center. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about how this has unfolded when you first found out about the attacks, and you know what kind of the response was then? Sure.
So the first attack was on one of the local scholars. Actually, his van was parked on the property, and a few other cars. And so when we came to the morning prayer, we found that these tires were slashed. And so it was very shocking that someone would deliberately take such actions. And we thought, okay, this is just a one-time thing, a random event that we want to catch the perpetrator, but it's not something to be overly concerned about. However, once it was repeated again a second time, and the glass windows to the front entrance of the mosque, as well as the side entrance and another window were broken, we knew that this was an escalation of the activity and that it was no longer a one-and-done incident, but rather a pattern of targeted hatred towards Islam and Muslims. And this continued, happened a third time at the mosque with the tires being slashed. And recently, in the past week, 2 times, separated by only a couple of nights, again, windows were smashed at the front doors to the New Medina Market on also Lamar, which is just a couple of miles away from the mosque.
Yeah, this is all on the one hand, it's shocking, but on the other, I can imagine this is something that given the kind of climate in the country right now, that so many Muslims and so many Middle Eastern people are having to constantly deal with. Is this something that the North Austin Muslim Community Center, or is this something you've had to deal with often in the past?
So it's increased recently. We've received more hate messages through our voicemail, through other media which connects to the mosque. And also at the same time, we received a lot of support. And so you have both sides, and you have hopefully the minority side, which is harboring hate towards Islam and Muslims. But then the majority have been phone calls welcoming Islam and Muslims, of support, of sympathy or empathy for the Muslim community in this time. We also will be having solidarity with our faith leaders as they express solidarity. But for the public, we'll be having a solidarity event next Friday, which will be the 28th at noon. And there will be sort of a human chain around the mosque just to have others in the faith community demonstrate that they are too with us, that when one of us are attacked, that we all are attacked, and that we need to come together. And so Muslims want to come to the aid of the oppressed and persecuted, and we welcome those who are coming also to our side as well for support.
Yeah, that is a powerful thing to be kind of showing that solidarity in a time where there is kind of a real uptick in hate crimes locally. Earlier this year we saw the Austin bombings, which I don't think were ever there was never a strong motive established there, but there was definitely a kind of pattern where he targeted, at least in the beginning, especially black neighborhoods and black churches as well. So I wonder. Right. If that, you've experienced that sort of like interreligious solidarity as well.
Yes, we have. Speaking to the atmosphere, I think it comes from the top down. When messages are being given by political officials, such as the Muslim ban, even though they don't want to call it a Muslim ban, but in the popular media, it's been referred to as a Muslim ban, that Muslims are somehow an alien force and that they're an enemy to America and American society, I think belies the reality that Muslims have been in the United States actually since the very beginning. About 20% of the slaves that were brought to this country were actually Muslim. Muslims served in the various conflicts, whether we agree with those wars or not, but they have served honorably in military. They're in the police force, the fire departments, but they're also part and parcel of the whole society. They're activists for various social causes. They are engaged in business ventures. They are engaged in professional careers. And so, yes, there has been an uptick in the hatred towards Islam and Muslims, but we will continue to be resilient, continue to contribute to the society around us. At the mosque, we have a free clinic, which we will continue to have for the disenfranchised classes who do not have health insurance, for example, or cannot afford to see a doctor. We have a food pantry. We have public lectures which go on about Islam and Muslims. So we'll continue all those activities.
And yeah, can you tell me also a little bit then about, sort of the day-to-day activities? Because looking,
Sure.
Kind of on the website, there's really, it appears to be so much really positive stuff going on here. I'm seeing not only the free clinic, but also a food pantry and all sorts of other public services.
Yes. So the main purpose of the mosque and the function of the center is actually to host the 5 daily prayers. So Muslims, they pray 5 times a day. So dawn, early afternoon, late afternoon, sunset, and then late night. And so this is the worship, the connection to God, which is at the root and the foundation for our service work, is a connection to He who is the most compassionate and the most merciful. So we say Allah, but this is just the Arabic name for the one God, the same God of Abraham, of Moses, of Jesus, the creator of the worlds. And so that is the main function of the mosque, is this worship. But also we serve families, children. We educate them in the religion, as well as giving them various services to excel, whether in the secular realm or in the religious realm. And we also have as you mentioned, the outreach type work for those in need. One of the public lectures we have coming up is about racial harmony. And what does Islam have to offer when it comes to the conflict sometimes between races and ethnicities? What can Islam bring to the table that is positive? That will be on the 26th, which is a Wednesday, 7:45 at the North Austin Muslim Community Center. And your audience is more than welcome to attend and participate in that discussion. We also have various networking activities, social networking, and we are reaching out to the interfaith community as well to establish stronger relationships and bonds.
Yeah, so that event that's being mentioned here, I've got it pulled up, and it's September 26th, called Peaceful Harmony in Islam. You can find that on the on Facebook. Basically the event says that it's a kind of monthly meetup for neighbors and friends. The religion of Islam provides a structure for peaceful interaction between people of various races and tribes. In times where racial tensions are simmering, can Islam offer constructive solutions to modern day challenges? I'd be curious as to how you believe Islam fits into fits into that
Sure.
goal. If you can give us just sort of a kind of preview of what we expect.
Sure. So one of the most important statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, 14 centuries ago, he said there is no favor for a white man over a black man, or a black man over a white man, except by their piety. And so he said that we are all created from Adam, and Adam was created from dust. He also said that be humble and do not let anybody arrogate over another person. The problem with arrogance based on racial superiority and that concept is that will allow the person to dehumanize the other to the point of transgression against their rights, and sometimes even taking their life and their property as if they are cattle instead of living, breathing human beings. And we see this, unfortunately, in conflicts, whether in Myanmar, whether the Holocaust and previous generations. And even it's linked to this person who is committing vandalism against the mosque and against Muslim businesses. It's because the other is seen as less, and they do not see them as themselves. And so Islam is saying to look at your human brother as yourself, and that you will not believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. So there is a lot that the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as well as the teachings of the Quran have to offer. One of those verses from the Holy Quran says, "O people, we have created you from a single male and female." So all of us, white, black, different continents coming, we're all from a single male and female, and we have made you into nations and tribes to know one another, not that you would fight each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is the one who has most God consciousness, or the most upright in their character. And so this rings true throughout the civil rights movement as well, similar spirit, and continues to be a need even in 2018, where we're seeing discrimination and we see racial hatred and discord, even in progressive societies. Then we need to all come together and take from our various faith traditions and find the positive ways to move forward all together.
There's a certain arrogance, I think, within American society, where even as you said, even so many so-called progressives feel that they need to advocate on behalf of this or that group, rather than understanding how this or that group is actually already involved in so much self-advocacy. And with Islam in particular, it's been such a powerful part. As we were talking about just a little bit of the sort of traditions of, progressive change, in sort of a deeply ingrained way within sort of a black, within sort of Black American culture and whatnot. I'm wondering how you feel connected to any of those sort of traditions.
Sure. So the strongest protagonist for Islam with respect to the African American experience, a very troubling experience throughout history in the United States, would be Malcolm X. And so he not only spoke eloquently, but he spoke from a place of truth and passionate meaning. And he transformed from being a Black nationalist into an advocate for the human race as a whole and for humanity as a whole. And this transformation happened to him when he went to Mecca and he saw Muslims who were blonde hair, blue eyes, who used to call the blonde hair, blue eye devil. Now all of a sudden he's sitting with them eating, sitting on the ground, which Islam teaches us to be humble, eating from the same plate. And all of a sudden his mind was blown that these are people in the United States, that there's a great deal of animosity towards one another between the races. But here in Mecca, in this atmosphere of worshiping the one God, then we can all be humble together, and that nobody is a slave to another human being. We are all devotees of God, the one God. And so this was a powerful message of Islam. Islam continues to spread also in the prison system in the United States. Unfortunately, a very unfair, unjust system that is criminalizing certain elements and segments of society and various forms of oppression that take place. But within the prison system, a lot of people are coming to Islam, and they're finding not only a discipline in being Muslim, but also a strength of character, strength of being, which comes from a place of peaceful coexistence, but also being strong as a person, who is to be dignified and treated in a correct fashion. Not to be arrogant or reactionary, but to be uplifted and upright and able to face society and invite society to all that is good.
And so, how then do you sort of with your kind of work at the North Austin Muslim Community Center? How do you feel then connected to that personally. Are you involved in any of those the struggles within the prison system, or just general community outreach? Or
Right. So I've served as imam in also Little Rock, Arkansas, and I've recently come back here to Austin. So I have visited prisons, and it's very refreshing to those who are incarcerated when they see a person coming from the outside who is talking to them, who is befriending them, who is interacting with them. And so it's very uplifting as well to see how much knowledge they have. You might think, oh, they're prisoners, they don't have a lot of knowledge, but they have so much knowledge of Islam. It's really amazing. They study the Quran, they study the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. And the hard work actually begins when they are released from prison, and then trying to integrate them within the Muslim community, within the broader society in a positive and a constructive manner, because they have so much lined up against them. That is the real challenge. And so as a mosque, we help not only by visitation of prisons, but also when people come out of prison, to help them to stand on their feet, to help them find employment, various forms of activity, in addition to just welcoming them into the community of the broader diverse community. Of course, it's a very diverse community. We have 60 different countries of origin at the mosque, including people who are Caucasian American or African American or Latino American, and including people from all over the world. And so sometimes it's difficult for a person to feel that they fit in. And so we make an extra effort to welcome anybody who is from a disenfranchised class and let them know they have a home with Islam.
To have 60 countries represented is really kind of amazing. How long has this mosque been around? And considering that if you've been here and you said Little Rock, Arkansas,
yes,
that seems to me like within an already challenging atmosphere within the U.S., which is a challenging place to bring Islam to begin with, or to kind of openly profess this. This
yes.
seems like some of the kind of most difficult places in the country to really bring these messages.
Yes.
I wonder how that has sort of influenced your work, and if we can also talk about how long this particular mosque has been around, and how its mission has evolved.
So this particular mosque, the North Austin Muslim Community Center, has been around since the mid-90s. However, the first mosque was actually in the late 70s, which is near the university campus. It's called the Oasis Mosque currently. There are about 25,000 Muslims in the Austin and Pflugerville Round Rock area. Some would say that it's more than that. So we've been around. I know families that have been around even from the 60s and 50s, but the first actual mosque was in the 70s. This is a later development, as the North Austin Muslim Community Center is the largest center in the Central Texas area because of the expansion and growth of North Austin. In terms of the challenges in Austin and in Little Rock, Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas, there was a strong African-American activist presence. And so we actually united together as a mosque coming from primarily immigrants and their children, to interacting with the African-American Muslim population in a positive, constructive way, whether it was through what they had already established as a community with soup kitchens and serving in the community, advocating for social justice causes. So we interacted with that. And maybe some people think that, it's in the South, it's a very conservative Christian environment. But even with conservative Christians, the Bible itself teaches social responsibility, teaches loving your neighbor, teaches the positive family values and structures, which we advocate as Muslims. And the hospitality that we like to talk about as Muslims, you can even find it in the South, whether it's amongst Southerners who are black or white, you still find that hospitality. Once we meet face to face, even with this vandal, if we meet him face to face, I'm sure his opinion will change, and his attitude will change toward Islam and Muslims. And so even a person who may be a Rush Limbaugh listener could meet with a Muslim and find some common ground and say, wait a minute, this is someone that I may have feared, I may have hated, but actually they're just like me as an American looking for peace, prosperity, security. And we can also identify with the liberal and progressive elements within the American society as well, who are advocating for immigration rights and for immigrant rights and other social justice causes to uplift all Americans together, regardless of their race or creed.
How Islam is coded in American society, what people assume Islam to be, has sort of changed in the past couple decades, where it's gone from, people kind of assume black to people now kind of assume like Arabic or Iranian or kind of Middle Eastern. How have you kind of seen things change in kind of people's public perception? Sure. And how has that kind of interaction with those different traditions of Islam within the U.S. been for you?
Sure. I think early on in the civil rights movement, Muslims were seen as the more militant wing of the civil rights movement, and they had a militaristic, martial feel towards them. But I would actually say that it was more of a discipline than a violent attempt to take over the country, for example. But that's what's been promulgated by people who are fearmongers and hateful. So when a person is disciplined and stands for protecting themselves and their families, that all of a sudden they're portrayed as a threat. Mm-hmm. And so that would be historically an issue to reconcile in terms of the hearts and minds of what did it really stand for, whether it's the Nation of Islam or what grew out of the Nation of Islam as well. We do not obviously support any sort of racial attacks. And Malcolm X himself, as we mentioned, he graduated and evolved in his thought to include also other races in the movement of social progress and social cohesion and upliftment. In terms of the immigrant population, I myself was born and raised in the United States. My parents come from Egypt. But growing up here in Austin, actually, in school, whenever there was a conflict with Iran, I was Iranian. Whenever there was a conflict with Iraq, I was Iraqi. And whenever there's a conflict with Afghanistan, then I'm Afghani. And so it's always seen as whoever the enemy is, that's who the Muslim is. And unfortunately, this has been in the history of the Western civilization, with the Crusades, with the interaction between Islam and the West. However, there are some positive interactions between Muslims and the West, whether you talk about Islamic Spain, Andalusia, and the flowering of that civilization, or actually the first country to recognize the United States of America was actually the Kingdom of Morocco. And they set up the Barbary treaties where they would defend the interests of the United States in the seas. And so there are positive examples which I think we should build on. And whether a Muslim is an immigrant or has been in the United States generation after generation, at the end of the day, we need to be like the rain, with that we bring goodness wherever we may be, whether it's Muslim in China. Muslims in China are suffering a lot of persecution now. The Uyghur Muslims, whether you're a Muslim in India or Pakistan or United States of America or South America, that it doesn't matter. As a Muslim, your responsibility to your society is to be positive, to be uplifting, to be a servant towards your fellow human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few minutes left. I'd like to, circle back around for people who may just be tuning in, or for people who may have been tuning in for a while and have forgotten. We are talking to Imam Islam of the the North Austin Muslim Community Center about some recent attacks that have happened on the Muslim community, as well as on the Middle Eastern community, that appear to be perpetrated by a single person here in Austin. I'd like to talk about, for those who are interested in either getting involved, learning more, or otherwise, supporting the North Austin Muslim Community Center and the Muslim community overall. in Austin, where is it they can go? Where is it they can get involved? And what sort of upcoming things do you have?
Sure. So our website is namcc.org. And so you're welcome to visit that website. The two main events coming up next week, which I'll reiterate, would be the public lecture, which will be on September 26th on racial harmony in Islam. And then the solidarity from friends, neighbors, faith leaders on Friday, which is our main holiday, weekly holiday, at 12 at noon. And so there will be sort of a human chain at the front of the mosque. And so we welcome anybody to come out. The more, the better. And we would be happy to welcome them. And then you can come to the mosque at any time. You can just send an email through the website and say you want to visit the mosque. We have classes coming from Austin High School, for example. One is coming up from other schools, charter schools or public schools, coming to learn about Islam, the mosque, and Muslims. We have an Islam 101 class, which will be advertised whenever it's coming up, just to know the basics of Islam. We don't try through that class, for example, to convert people. We just want to break the ice, explain what Islam is, and then let people decide for themselves what they want to do with that information. But I think it's important in the spirit of Mark Twain to be educated about the world, to travel, to know the other. And in this way, we become more open-minded, and is through the interaction. Maybe we don't have to travel thousands of miles. We can just go a few miles up the road to a mosque, and you will find cultures and people who come from all over the world, and interacting with them. Even for me as a Muslim, I learned so much about India and Pakistan and Iran and the African American experience and the Latino experience. And so that atmosphere is there at the mosque. And so we welcome anybody to come and see what it's like and take part as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was nice to get to talk to you about Islam, and I hope that the response you receive continues to be kind of positive, and that people hopefully are seeing the mosque and the community center as a real positive force for change.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Dallas Police Chief Renee Hall has refused to fire police officer Amber Guyger, even as Guyger faces manslaughter charges for shooting Botham Jean in his own apartment on September 6th. Meanwhile, community outrage continues to grow as Dallas PD fails to get their story straight. What will it take to get justice for Botham Jean? Joining us to talk about this and much more is Marissa Rodriguez, who's a community organizer who's been involved in the Justice for Botham movement in Dallas. Thank you, Marissa, for coming on the show.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me.
So let's start with the actual shooting incident itself on September 6th. There's a lot of conflicting stories that have been going around. What do we know so far about the way this shooting transpired? What details have we been able to pin down? And what are some of the discrepancies with the police department and the facts that have come out?
Right. So unfortunately, the public's understanding of what happened on September 6th around 9 p.m. is largely built on the affidavit that Amber Guyger, the police who actually committed the murder. So our story is basically built on her story. And we know from what the affidavit states that there are many inconsistencies, some of which are just blatantly lies. For example, she said that she was fumbling with the key. That was sort of the reason that we know that that's not true is because neighbors report hearing police talk, is the way that the neighbors put it. Stuff like, let me in, open up, Dallas police. So these sort of verbal commands that, she does allude to in her affidavit that just sort of, contradict the idea that she was mistakenly entering this apartment. That's like the first kind of glaring piece of information that just doesn't make sense. If she thought she was at her own apartment, she was struggling with the key, trying to get in because it was the wrong door, Why then would she be, making a lot of noise, according to what the neighbor said, and saying things like, let me in, open up. That just kind of right there doesn't add up. From what we understand and what we can kind of extrapolate, just as the public wanting answers and following the case, it seems very evident that Amber Guyger murdered this man. She entered his apartment by forcing her way in, demanding that he open the door, and when he did, she shot him. Early crime scene evidence suggests that it was actually maybe a 10 to 12 foot distance. So she actually shot him sort of in the length of the room itself, and not necessarily in the doorway as we've sort of been imagining this. So there are some glaring inconsistencies with the story, just right from the beginning.
Yeah, the fact that the door has been reported to have either been closed or ajar, the fact that it appears the apartment had an automatic door locking mechanism that would contradict the story being put forth. There are definitely so many unknowns, and it seems from what I've seen that Dallas police have been very, very tight-lipped, not just on the story itself, not just on the actual details of the day of the shooting, but they've also been tight-lipped on Amber Guyger's whereabouts, her status with the police department. They were originally at one point saying that they did not know where she was after the shooting, which seems to be very likely a falsehood to me.
Right. Yeah, it was hard for me to watch that interview with Chief Renee Hall. This was just some hours really after the events transpired. It was hard for me to watch that and hear her say the words, "We don't know where she is," and for me to just accept that as a matter of course. Like, that doesn't seem like that would be true at all. If you or me or anyone else had committed such a heinous act of murder, like, that would absolutely not be the case. Everyone would know exactly where we were. We would be in the jail. We would be in behind bars. Like, that just doesn't make any sense at all.
And of course, she is not behind bars at this point. She was charged with manslaughter, which many seem to be saying is a way to avoid murder charges or whatnot. It seems like manslaughter has a different sort of implication than murder does, and is definitely a lighter kind of charge. But then the fact that she was essentially out on bail, what was it, within hours or so, while many of the people who have been protesting, there's the Dallas Nine that I hope to get into a little bit later in this interview, that have been sitting in jail for some time for what appears to be no other crime than having protested this killer cop. Let's first talk about what the kind of responses by the community have been since then. What were sort of the early responses after this story came to light? What was the kind of feeling in the community, and what transpired with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There were, this information spread very quickly, of course, in the days and the next hours following. This happened in the evening, and then sort of the next day, pretty soon after waking up, people were sharing this information. And there was just sort of this incredulous response, like, how could this happen? How did this happen? And in the early days, in the first couple of days, I believe it took 2 or maybe even 3 days. We didn't even know the name or the identity. We just knew that it was a woman cop. So it was just such a weird, it had a very strange feeling. From the very beginning, something just felt off about this situation. So a cop entered the wrong apartment. Like, nobody could really kind of wrap their minds around that detail, which is how it's been described over and over again. So, like, even just from that headline itself, that short tagline of "cop enters wrong apartment, kills man," it just doesn't make any sense. So people were justifiably angry, very upset, and very frustrated that this is happening again and again and again. I attended the vigil that took place on the 7th. It was a vigil that was hosted and headed off by a grassroots organization here in Dallas called Mothers Against Police Brutality, and they do excellent work. They've been community organizing for about 5 years or so after one of the founders lost a son to police here in Dallas. His name was Clinton Allen. So they held the vigil, and Lee Merritt spoke. Lee Merritt is the attorney for the Jean family on this case. He spoke, and he told us about O'Shea Terry, who had been killed by Arlington police just days before this. But it was like he said that he got one phone call to represent this family, the Terry family, and then was essentially landing in Dallas from visiting family elsewhere with the Terry family, and he gets another phone call, and it's, there's been another police murder of a black man in Dallas. It was just back to back, and it's hard for the community to even catch its breath. All of this comes 1 week after the sentencing of Roy Oliver, who killed 15-year-old Jordan Edwards in Balk Springs, Texas, which is just in the south, I believe it's the southeast corner of Dallas. It's like community can't get its breath. It can't catch its breath. It's not allowed to heal from one, traumatic event before there are yet others, just blowing up the headlines. And it's awful. It feels terrible.
What exactly has the atmosphere been like with regard to especially black communities in Dallas and other kind of marginalized populations? Like what is the relationship to the police department, especially given that there is a police chief who is a black woman? How does that kind of factor into this?
Yeah, it's actually it's an interesting, to say the least, set of circumstances. Chief Renee Hall, if I'm correct, came from Chicago, where there is, reportedly just killings in black communities, but just shootings kind of constantly on a constant basis. It's just kind of a way of life there almost. So Chief Renee Hall comes to Dallas, and these are the things that are put on her plate, and seeing how she has responded in the wake of these events, it's very disappointing as a Dallas community member to see the chief of police essentially pass the buck. The case was transferred to the Texas Rangers immediately because initially it was reported as an officer-involved shooting, which would have meant that when an officer is actually on duty and in the field and a shooting occurs, that's an officer-involved shooting. Well, initially this case had been reported as such, but when it became clear and evident that that's actually not exactly what had happened, that's when DPD and Chief Renee Hall made the decision to pass the case along to the Texas Rangers. And the Texas Rangers have been even more tight-lipped than the DPD. The DPD are actually who is responsible for leaking the information that there was supposedly some marijuana found in Botham's apartment on the day of his funeral, no less. So that's the source of that information was reportedly DPD, unnamed DPD members. The Texas Rangers have been very tight-lipped. They have not revealed any toxicology results from the blood that was drawn supposedly from Amber the night of the crime. Again, there was a very quiet, protection of her name, even just in the days following. If it wasn't for Attorney Lee Merritt, we would have not, I don't know how long it would have taken any of the officials at any level involved in this case to have revealed that information. Who knows? We may not have it still if it weren't for Attorney Lee Merritt sort of giving that information to the public here in Dallas. And people are highly distrustful. If they weren't already distrustful of DPD and of the Dallas Police, association and any sort of arm of what's happening, the DA's office, the Texas Rangers, the mayor's office, they certainly are distrustful now.
It's becoming obvious that we have such a societal problem here. And I think this case, more than anything, reveals the kind of double standards and the hypocrisy, absolute hypocrisy on its face of these police departments who will say such things as, we can't release any of the details of this shooting while it's ongoing, but they certainly didn't have any problem releasing the detail that so much of the local media latched onto, that Botham Jean had a small amount of marijuana in his apartment, the one that Amber Guyger, it seems that Amber Guyger broke into his apartment and shot him. In one way or another, she broke into his apartment and shot him. Whether or not he has marijuana, whether or not he has anything, no matter what sort of person he is, it should not matter. Really, it's so laughable on its face, in its face, and I think more people are seeing it that now that again, I don't want to pin this on social media because I think there are also societal problems that are coming to light. But now that there are so many, now that information travels faster, I think people are seeing it in larger amounts. So what, talking about the protests, what sort of protests are we seeing out there? Yeah, what is the general feel that, like, what would justice look like if in this case?
So communities here have been demanding. There's a tagline that sort of has sprung up from these events, and it's, "Can we get justice in our living room?" Understandably, if you leave your home, if you go out into the world, if you encounter these white supremacist institutions who are basically predicated on shoot first, ask questions later, as evidenced by the 900 plus cop killings of citizens a year in the United States. And reportedly, this year is what already is going to surpass that. And we still have, a handful of months left in the year. So people are demanding justice for Botham, justice for O'Shea, justice for Botham, meaning that Amber Guyger would be, first of all, fired by the police department, as she is still on their payroll, which is just, I don't think that you or I could shoot somebody and have a job the next day. I don't think that that's how that normally works. So Amber Guyger would be fired. She would be charged with murder, as opposed to manslaughter, which is, as you mentioned earlier, it is manslaughter is a slightly lighter charge. She would be imprisoned. She would be sent to jail. And also the media would need to, justice would be the media apologizing very formally to the Jean family for distributing the information that was leaked to them about this supposed small amount of marijuana on the day that he was laid to rest, no less. Which is, as Lee Merritt put it, the highest form of disrespect. Protests here have been ongoing. There's been protests almost every other day. I know that family members and friends of mine, it's almost like, are you going to go protest today? It's like every other day, which is an excellent indicator that the consciousness of Dallas is growing, and the consciousness of the world. The United States is. This is a very, very well-known case across the U.S. Everybody is sort of watching what Dallas is doing. Attorney Lee Merritt hosted they headed off a protest on Sunday. This was held at the AT&T Stadium. So there was a game going on. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. It was a pop-up protest. So he put the word out on Facebook in the morning and, trusted the community to show up with very little information other than, we're going to demand justice for Botham, but we're going to do it in a way that it's going to be sort of a secret at first. So 4 p.m., community members gathered at a Friendship West Church in South Dallas. And Lee Merritt divulged the details of what we were going to do. They had prepared buses for us to transport us from Dallas to Arlington. They had also 2 coffins. So the 2 coffins were not only significant in demonstrating, the life of Botham and the life of O'Shea, but also meant to demonstrate first they kill your body and then they kill your name. So there was quite a bit of significance in the coffins. So we were the designated mourners. So we were bussed out to the stadium, and we marched essentially from the parking lot right up to the center there at the stadium. Media was present, and these are the events that actually led up to the arrest of the Dallas Nine. So the Dallas Nine were 9 protesters who led their own sort of spontaneous protest. Our protest that had been planned was meant to be more mournful and more, there was going to be sort of an element of drama and really kind of demonstrate very clearly some of the effects that the community was feeling with the presence of 2 coffins. The Dallas Nine had it in their hearts and in their spirits to continue protesting more loudly. So they did that, and they initially broke away from us, and they continued on and demanding justice for Botham, justice for O'Shea, no justice, no peace. And they were swiftly arrested by Arlington Police Department, who is the same police department that killed O'Shea Terry. And they've not yet, to my understanding, there's been no justice for the Terry family either. So the Dallas Nine were held in jail for 2 nights. Bond was not being posted at all. There were definitely funds waiting for them, as the community here were very swift and responsive to, gathering the necessary funds and having that money ready to go. But the bond itself just wasn't posted for 2 nights. So essentially, these protesters were they spent, as you've alluded to earlier, they spent more time in jail than the murderous cop, Amber Guyger, ever did. I don't know if Amber spent as much as 2 hours in jail. She was booked and immediately posted bond. So I don't know that she spent even 2 hours in jail. And yet these protesters who are bravely protesting the, just the waves and waves and waves of injustice that we have been feeling, not just in Dallas, but all over the United States. They were, punished for expressing the rage that so many feel. And it's just a very clear demonstration of how much the organization that calls itself the police, whether it be in Arlington and Dallas and Baltimore, wherever in the United States, that there is no justice. There is no justice for people who are slain by police. I don't know how much more clear or evident things need to be made. It just seems that we're at sort of our tipping point.
For people to see what these actions, what these direct action campaigns look like, they'll start to see the role of the police and who the police really, quote unquote, protect and serve in these things. So one of the actions that happened in Austin recently, one of the kind of major, points of struggle here was an anti-fascist demonstration where there were a handful of fascists, of course, toting assault rifles in public and whatnot, trying to essentially spread hate speech at the Capitol. We were able to, various groups were able to shut them down. It was a broad coalition of basically, I would say, everybody on the left, socialist, communist, anarchist, leftist of various sorts, showed up and, was able to completely shut them down. But seeing that the police, the only reason these fascists were allowed to spew hate speech to the Capitol in the first place was because of the incredibly militarized, armed police presence of I believe is a DPS. You start to see in just the sort of body language, in the military formations, in the way they treat these various groups and are friendly with fascists and very very vicious toward leftists and whatnot, or in this case when it's a Black Lives Matter style demonstration of one sort or another, you see who it is they're facing toward in opposition, and you see who it is they're protecting in ways that I think, it really just requires people to come out to this sort of thing. It requires people to look at, it requires people to look at the way the police respond to these various events. And then you'll begin to see that this is not just these sort of isolated incidents, but that this is in fact in many ways the role of the police, and not just the contemporary role, but the historical role of the police is to protect, on the one hand, private property, and on the other to, essentially act as sort of an instrument of white supremacy, as historically an instrument of slavery or Jim Crow. Like there's an economic and then there's a social, component to the way the police operate, I believe. How have you seen this in Dallas?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's evident. It's made more and more evident. Just the ridiculous nature of this particular case with Botham. The man was sitting in his living room, and I don't know how much more evident it needs to be that the police are, they do exist with a legacy of racism and upholding white supremacy, and they're in positions of power, and they work to maintain the status quo. And we as community members need to, as you said, continue to show up and make noise and demand justice. And it's not going to come nicely. It's not going to come easily, unfortunately. Because pleading and voting are not the only ways to ask for justice, but actually showing up in mass and continuing to demonstrate that the people are not okay with what happened, and the people are not okay with the continued impunity with which these forces act, the police forces. It's unjust, and it's uncivilized, and we won't stand for it.
So we have a couple minutes left. I'd like to, we were talking about two different police killings here. I believe the other one, I'll be honest, I am unfamiliar with. You said it was the Terry family that was affected. Yeah,
O'Shea Terry. He was shot during a routine traffic stop. The details are that he was stopped by police. Police were sort of hanging off the side of his SUV, standing on the little the rail there that's beneath the door, kind of hanging over the car. And he was told to step out of the vehicle, and he disregarded that order, began to roll up his window because the cop was sort of hanging onto it, and just sort of very slowly drove away, started to drive away. And the cop shot him. That was his first response, was to shoot. And he fatally shot O'Shea Terry at the scene. And this was all captured actually on the officer's body cam. So, the details of that particular case, I mean, first of all, nobody deserves to be shot by the police. The police do not serve as the judge, jury, and executioner. That isn't their role, even though they do act that way. So the details of that particular case, they could be argued. Well, if Shea was just not responding to orders and sort of doing something that he shouldn't have done, he was driving away from the police. Sure. Even still, he did not deserve the fate that he met. It just being sort of something that dovetails with the Botham case, where you've got an example of someone who, the public could argue that, that he wasn't behaving in a way that was appropriate, and he was, doing something dangerous by driving away from the police. And then you've got that juxtaposed with Botham, who was literally just sitting in his apartment. And so these things sort of are two sides of a coin that illustrate it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what you do if you are a black or brown body in the United States. The likelihood that the police will kill you if they interact with you just goes through the roof. And, demonstrated very clearly by these two cases that happen so close together here in cities that are very close together in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
That is a very good point, that it really, in so many ways, if you're a black or brown person, it does not matter what you do, where you are, what commands you follow, what commands you don't follow, even if not following orders was for some reason an executable offense. It clearly does not matter in so many ways. The police across the country feel that this need to act with absolute impunity. As you said, judge, jury, executioner in these two cases. And that's why, having talked to other activists locally on this issue, one of the simple solutions that people need to talk more about, I do believe, is the simple downsizing of police forces. We need to defund, and we need to downsize the amount of police, because the truth is that, statistically, the more interactions that these communities have with police, the more interactions that marginalized communities have with police, the more likely they are to be shot or to be arrested for these small often quote unquote crimes like marijuana possession. The simple fact is, community policing, this idea of community policing, is simply a distraction from the fact that we have too many cops on the street. We have too many cops, especially in black and brown neighborhoods where they patrol most vehemently, especially those that are in the process of being gentrified. That's where you find the most cops essentially surveilling the area, looking for the implementing these quote unquote broken windows policies. So if you downsize the number of police, you downsize the budget. That is the surest way I know at the moment to very quickly begin to combat this the so-called police brutality epidemic. How would you recommend people get involved in the struggles, either in Dallas or nationally, against these police killings?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone listening is able to attend on September 29th, at Dallas City Hall, there's going to be a protest, a very large demonstration, for justice for Botham. Botham's birthday is on the 27th of September, and so he was going to turn 27 this year. And so the 29th has been set aside as a date. It's a Saturday. City Hall, Dallas, 11 a.m. is when events will be starting. Get involved if there's a police oversight board, or if there's a organization like the one we have here, Mothers Against Police Brutality. Any of your socialist and communist organizations are certainly going to be fighting police brutality around the United States. I highly, highly recommend folks get involved and make sure that we can make it known that we are not okay with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I would second all of that. We have been joined by Marissa Rodriguez, who's a community organizer who has been involved with the Justice for Botham movement, as well as other anti-police brutality movements in the city of Dallas. Thank you, Marissa, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all we have for this week. You've been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. You can find our show on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher by typing in People's Republic. Or you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. Thank you for listening as we report on the global struggle for social and economic justice. We are out of here.